This video is sponsored by Alpha Unlimited. Yo Brollies, let me ask you a question. How much does a gaming mousepad or a mousepad in general matter to you when it comes to your performance, comfort, and overall purchasing decision? Do you have a particular preference in terms of texture, surface glide, thickness, flexibility, or even water resistance? Or for you, anything goes as long as the design fits your setup? Let me know in the comments below. Now, Alpha Unlimited, which is a local brand here in the Philippines that offers a slew of different gaming mousepads, asked me if I can take a look at their lineup, compare them, and share with you my thoughts. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. In this video, we're going to check out the complete lineup of gaming mousepads from Alpha Unlimited so that you can have an idea of what fits your preference. But this is actually not limited to what they offer. This is also applicable to pretty much any gaming mousepads out in the market. This is probably my most comprehensive review of a mousepad, so it should be interesting. By the way, I'm going to give away one microcontrol extended mousepad to one of you guys, so make sure to watch the entire video. With that being said, let's get into it. Alright, so for the purpose of this video, we're going to break down all the comparisons into 8 categories. Texture, surface glide in both light and heavy pressure, static and dynamic friction, thickness, flexibility, and water resistant. And then at the end, I'm going to share with you my personal choice. But before we start, I just want to make an important disclaimer that some of the tests and comparisons here are highly subjective since some involve human senses, specifically touch. And I understand it highly varies depending on each individual's ability and perception. So please take everything with a grain of salt. But still, I do hope that somehow this comparison video will help you decide which one to choose. So for the test subjects, we have the Panzer, which in my opinion is quite similar to the OG Racer Goliathus mousepad. And then we have the Speed Control, which features a common OEM surface. The Mach 1, which I think is one of the most balanced here in the lineup. The Sonic, which is one of the smoothest here. And the Microcontrol, which spoiler alert is my current main mousepad. Alright, so in terms of texture or the roughness characteristic, in my opinion, number 1 is the Panzer. This is the roughest among the bunch, and if you look closely using a macro lens, you'll see that the nits are quite large, especially if we compare this later to the other mousepads. Like I said earlier, this reminds me of the OG Racer Goliathus gaming mousepad. Number 2 is the Microcontrol, and by touch, you'll definitely feel how rough it is, and looking closer, while the nits are not as large as the Panzer, as you can tell, they are well defined, and I think you can get the idea that this one really provides a good amount of resistance. Number 3 is Sonic, and this is where it starts to get smoother. The Sonic in my opinion feels really smooth even from just touching the surface. And looking closer, as you can see, the nits are thinner and somehow not that even, with some of the threads overlapping the others. Number 4 is Mach 1, which as you may notice later, sits almost entirely at the center of our rankings. And as you can see, the nits are smaller and look softer than the others. And lastly, which has the smoothest texture, is the Speed Control. The nits look quite similar to the Mach 1 but are tighter and thinner. It is also pretty soft compared to others. Now, in my opinion, the surface texture is not only about the overall friction and control, but should also be considered in terms of comfort. Like, do you prefer a smoother texture for your palm, or would you rather want to feel a rougher texture while gliding your mouse around? Now, the next couple of tests is about surface glide, and I actually decided to do 2 types of tests. One for light pressure and one for heavy pressure. Because not everyone uses the same amount of pressure when gaming, and it's actually quite interesting to find out that the surface glide significantly differs depending on how much you press towards the surface. So let's start with light pressure. This is probably for a more chill game style or casual gaming. Number 1, which is the fastest, is the Sonic. Thanks to the combination of the type of nit and smoothness of the texture, gliding a mouse on this one feels really fast. More than enough for my liking, to be honest. Number 2 is Mach 1, and to be perfectly honest with you, the Mach 1 and Speed Control are pretty close to each other in terms of this particular test. So number 3 is Speed Control. Now the next one is interesting to me because at number 4 for the light pressure test, I have the Microcontrol over the Panzer, but on the heavy pressure test, I have the Panzer over the Microcontrol. So the surface glide definitely varies depending on how much pressure you put on the surface. Again, this is highly subjective depending on each individual's perspective or feeling. So for the heavy pressure test, I still have the Sonic at number 1, the Speed Control at number 2, the Mach 1 at number 3, the Panzer at number 4, and the Microcontrol at number 5. I am a heavy pressure kind of gamer, especially during competitive gaming, so this test made a lot of sense to me why the Microcontrol is my personal favorite. Now, the next couple of tests is about static and dynamic friction. Static friction is the amount of resistance a mousepad has when you move your gaming mouse from a static position, whereas dynamic friction is the amount of resistance of the mousepad when you are already moving your mouse. This is one of those tests that also highly varies depending on each individual sensory capability, especially for dynamic friction. Starting with the static friction, I have the sonic at number 1, which means it requires the least amount of force before you can move the mouse from a static position. Number 2 is speed control, number 3 is Mach 1, number 4 is microcontrol, and last is the Panzer. As you may have noticed, the result is pretty much similar to the light pressure surface glide test. As for the dynamic pressure, it's basically the same except for the Mach 1 and speed control. This is very hard to determine, and I tried my very best to observe and really feel the difference. I even turned off all the sounds around my environment. I think I went crazy for a moment there. The next comparison is pretty basic but is important nonetheless, which is thickness. In my opinion, thickness helps with the overall stability of the mousepad and in a way gives you a perception of the overall quality of the materials used. Number 1, which is the thickest, is Mach 1, which is around 4.5mm. Next is microcontrol at around 4.1mm, Panzer at around 3.8mm, Sonic at around 3.5mm, and lastly, speed control, which is probably also the cheapest, is around 3mm. Next is flexibility. This one I think is important in terms of storage, portability, and probably stability as well, since if a mousepad is too flexible, it can possibly move around from pressure. The most flexible is no other than speed control. Next is the Panzer, which is quite surprising given its thickness, probably because of its fabric. Next is Mach 1, which although is the thickest, is still quite flexible compared to the last two. Next is microcontrol, and lastly, Sonic, because of the quite hard fabric compared to the others. And for our last test, we have water resistance. This one is important when it comes to maintenance. Now for gaming, it is quite important that the surface and texture are not affected by any other external factors like coating. So all of the mousepads here are actually uncoated, except for the speed control because it is just an OEM fabric. But even with that, they still vary in terms of water resistance. Some are faster to absorb water than others, and some are longer to absorb, making them easier to clean and maintain. So number 1, which is the most water resistant, is of course the speed control. Next is Sonic. Thanks to its relatively harder fabric, it'll take at least 34 seconds before it seeps in. Next is microcontrol, which can take at least 23 seconds. Mach 1, which takes just around 4 seconds. And lastly, Panzer, which is quite thirsty that it doesn't even take 1 second before it takes in the water, which means you'll have no time to wipe the liquid off. And if that liquid smells, then good luck. Now, before I give you my final thoughts, here's a quick unprofessional slide test so that you can have an idea of how the Phantek Aria XD7 with its default glider slides through these gaming mousepads. This test doesn't involve any type of external pressure other than a super light tap until the mouse moves on its own. So the result is different from our previous test, which on its own is quite interesting. By the way, like I said earlier, I'm going to give away one extended microcontrol gaming mousepad to one of you guys, and all you have to do to join is like and share this video, of course subscribe if you haven't already, and comment down below which Alpha Unlimited mousepad is your preference with a hashtag AlphaUNLTD. Now to conclude, again all these comparisons are highly dependent on my ability to perceive via touch, so please take them with a grain of salt. But rest assured that I tried my best to make the test as objective as possible. I also understand that some of you might disagree with my rankings, and that's perfectly fine, and I'm all open to your feedback. But at the end of the day, I hope at least you got a thing or two on what to check when it comes to choosing the right mousepad for you. As for my personal rankings, when it comes to the mousepad that I'm likely to use among this bunch, the first one, which again is my favorite, is still the microcontrol. I recommend this to those people who want to feel a noticeable rough texture, not only for precise control, but also for the overall feel when gliding the mouse. Next is Panzer, because I find it quite nostalgic. I actually used the Razer Goliathos extended mousepad before, maybe around 2011, and the Panzer perfectly reminds me of that. Next is Mach 1. I recommend this for those people who want a good balance between speed and control. Next is Sonic, which to be honest, I cannot personally use because it's too smooth for my liking. So if you want a fast gliding mousepad, this is the way to go. The last one that I can recommend is the speed control. This is my least favorite because it is too thin, too smooth, and is also coated, which is really not ideal for gaming. But if you fancy those characteristics, then by all means. And there you have it guys, thank you for watching. Huge thanks to Alpha Unlimited not only for sponsoring this video, but also for allowing me to make this comparison because honestly, I had a lot of fun and it was a breath of fresh air for this channel. You can get these mouse pads using the links below. Thank you for watching, subscribe if you like this, and see you next time. Have a great day guys, you're awesome.